we came up with some commonalities, like states where the cremation rate goes a little bit more slow or have heavy manufacturing and heavy agriculture, overall lower education levels, lower incomes. So think rural, right? Lower transients, meaning more home ownership, fewer apartment buildings. And then the converse is true too. So where cremation rates are growing faster is where more small businesses are prevalent, more transients like vacation homes or, what have you. And so that goes a little bit away when you think of Washington, Nevada, Nevada retirees in Maine. But I think unique to those states, Maine, my joke is that Maine is basically Canada. I mean that as a compliment to folks who live in Maine.
Welcome to the Direct Cremation Podcast with your host, Tyler Yamasaki. Hi, thank you for joining us on the Direct Cremation Podcast. I'm your host, Tyler Yamasaki, CEO of Parting Pro, the #1 online arrangement platform. If you like the content, please give us a like, subscribe, turn on notifications, and leave a comment. So today's guest is a familiar face to the Direct Cremation Podcast. With her third appearance on the show, she needs very little introduction. Coming up on 13 years as the executive director of the Cremation Association of North America, or CANA, as we'll be referring to it throughout the rest of the episode. She's here to get into some of the details of the highly anticipated CANA annual statistics report. Please give a warm welcome back to the show, Barbara Kemmis.
Thanks, Tyler. It's great to be home. It feels like home here in your studio.
Yep. If you can't see, it's because she is at home, but yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so for those that don't know, can you give a quick, brief intro about who you are, what CANA is, and then we can get into the report?
Yeah, I can't believe it's coming up in 13 years in October. That's lucky 13. I love it. Mm-hmm. So I came to CANA from associations. I'm a librarian by trade, not a funeral professional. And when I saw the job position for CANA, I thought, that is hilarious. There's an association for everything, or two or three. And during the interview, I fell in love with funeral directors and cemeterians, cremationists. Really, I thought, these are my people. They are smart and data-driven, service-oriented. I want to help them be better. And CANA is a trade association. So our members actually are businesses like Parting Pro. Thank you very much for your membership. And that's what we do, is we design education, research, all sorts of things to help you improve your business. And the bottom line, common denominator, is cremation, all things cremation. So we have 3,700 members up. We've almost tripled in size from when I started. But one thing that's remained constant is our research. Our annual statistics report has been published for basically since 1914, the year after CANA was established. So over 100 years.
Awesome. So can you talk a little bit about what goes into creating this report, what the data speaks about, and, some of the... We don't have to get into the trends and the actual numbers yet, but we can kind of get into, what goes into actually creating this report every year.
Sure. It's the effort from a number of CANA staff, and we being the royal we, it is not I who contacts all these people, but I have great people who do this. We contact every state and province, and we're working on Mexican states as well, but have some challenges there. But we contact every state and province every year, and we contact the relevant vital statistics departments. Sometimes it's public health, sometimes it's called something else. And we ask them for aggregate numbers, meaning total numbers, nothing personally identifiable about disposition. And what's exciting is for the past, 10 years for sure, we have a solid 10-year data set of all forms of disposition, but we publish cremation. And we can get into why about that later. And usually we get numbers from within 1 to 3 years. So for example, this report we published in May has final numbers through 2022 and provisional numbers through 2023. And what does that mean? Some states aren't done counting, or they're just not quite, have finalized all the death certificates. And so a statistics consultant we work with has developed an algorithm that is remarkably accurate, and he projects those numbers for 1 year, 5 years, and 10 years for each state and province. So
Awesome.
it's a year-round project. We count crematories too, which is a whole different thing. Now we're talking about air permits and different licensing boards, but that's another story.
Yeah. So I had a chance to look at the data, and there's quite a bit of different ways that you sliced it up and presented the data. And what immediately struck me was that it looks like the growth as a percentage has stagnated a bit, meaning that, from 2013 to 2018, we saw 7.9% growth. And from 2018 to 2023, that growth as a percentage is pretty close, 7.8%. So pretty much the same. And previously to that, it was like 12 or 13%, right? Growth previous 5 years. So it's still growing, but if you had to guess, what do you think the next 5 years are going to look like in terms of growth? Are we still going to see a stagnation? Are we going to see a growth? Are we going to see shrinkage? What do you think?
Yeah, there's two kind of shapes I would recommend you imagine, and I'll talk with my hands, so maybe I'll make those shapes with my hands. We'll see. But the first is, think of a speedometer. Okay, so when you're driving and you accelerate, right? There's the speed keeps increasing, but after a certain point, it's harder to go faster, right? And so we think of cremation growth kind of like a speedometer in that way, in that because we're now over 60%, we're in a deceleration of growth. To be clear, the cremation rate's never going to reverse. Well, I guess never say never, but that's not what math shows us. It's highly unlikely to reverse, but growth rate will slow, as you saw and observed. The other shape to think of is an S curve. And so I describe that as the very first cremation that took place in the United States was in 1876 in Washington, Pennsylvania. And between then and 1972, so roughly 100 years, it took that long for the cremation rate to hit 5%. So that's a very long tail. And then from 1972 to 2016, it hit 50%. So that's a pretty steep part of the S. And now, as we're decelerating, we've exited rapid growth and decelerating, and then we'll enter a plateau, usually around 75 to 80% will hit the plateau. Then that's the top part of the second S. So it's not a curvy S, it's a backward Z, kind of, if you think of it that way. And so that's what the math says should happen. And that's actually what has happened pretty reliably. So we're still in the kind of upward climb, but that's leveling off into the upper end of the S.
Yeah. And to be clear, we are saying that in 2023, there was about a 60.6% cremation rate, right?
Yep.
It doesn't specify the type of cremation, right? So that could be direct cremation, that could be cremation with services, but that's
exactly
of all the deaths happen, cremation. So one of the questions that I have is, you look at some of the states, and Nevada, Maine, and Oregon all sit at above 80% cremation rate. And I know we have the traits, the religious, the roamers, like all that stuff. But do you feel that those are just overly expressed in these states that show that, or is there some other reason why those states sit so high on the cremation rate?
Yeah, that's a great question. We did some research a while ago, almost with the last census data, 2010 census data and 2012 cremation data, trying to understand why some states grow faster than others. Because and we did do states, not Canadian provinces, actually. Yeah. But we came up with some commonalities, like states where the cremation rate grows a little bit more slow, or have heavy manufacturing and heavy agriculture, overall lower education levels, lower incomes. So think rural, right? Lower transients, meaning more home ownership, fewer apartment buildings. And then the converse is true too. So where cremation rates are growing faster is where more small businesses are prevalent, more transients like vacation homes or, what have you. And so that goes a little bit of the way when you think of Washington, Nevada, Nevada retirees, and Maine. But I think unique to those states, Maine, my joke is that Maine is basically Canada. Uh, I mean that
Yeah.
as a compliment to folks who live in Maine, but it tracks with, there's a, oh, let me just pause first by saying I'm waving my hands around a lot, but if you go to the CANA website, www.cremationassociation.org, and find the statistics page on there, you can see some of these maps that I'm referencing. So
Yeah.
if I'm not painting a vivid picture with my words, you can see some of these things, including the speedometer, et cetera. But there's this notion that we discovered with this research of geographic clustering, which basically means we do what our neighbors do. And so when you look at this heat map showing the different cremation rates, it's very common to have states, that are grouped together, like in the Midwest or Southeast or whatever, and they have the same or similar cremation rates. So Washington's the highest, but Oregon's a close second, right? And Nevada's not too far away. So that's a potpourri of reasons. But really, the notion of direct cremation really started in Washington. So it's been interesting to watch Washington grow steadily, Nevada kind of spike fast with the population transfer, I think, of retirees. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you kind of look at the map, anything kind of west of Texas is above 60 to 70%. Except Utah. Utah kind of sits in the lower half. And then everything kind of east of that. There are some states that do have a higher percentage, but I'll definitely link that into all the descriptions, all the industry statistics. Yeah.
Yeah. There was always some outliers. There's some, and it's interesting. The more, like California, you would think everybody would assume California would have the highest cremation rate in the country. And a lot of times when I ask that question of students in schools and mortuary programs, they always guess California has the highest rate, and it really doesn't. I think it just hit 70% this year. And not that that's low, mind you, of course, but we see this in states like Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, New York, California, Texas to an extent. The more diversity there is, the more kind of middle of the road national level or national growth rate that the growth rate is following.
Yeah.
For what it's worth. Yeah.
And then would you say the opposite is true for Mississippi, Alabama, and Kentucky, which are, Mississippi's way down there. It's like a 32% cremation rate. And then Kentucky and Alabama are closer to 40. So those are pretty low considering you have like Nevada on the 80%. Would you just say that the reasoning is probably close to the cremation growth traits?
Well, what we're watching in those states is so first of all, the census data we looked at would show with high manufacturing, high agriculture. I didn't mention the influence of religion, but there's almost a 1-to-1 correlation with cremation rate growth and unaffiliation with religion. So if I'm a nun, N-O-N-E, I am far more likely to choose cremation than any other form of disposition. If I am, which I am from a small town and a fundamental Christian background, which I left and then moved to a city. But if I am those things and I stayed in that community and I have the strong sense of connection to that community, I am, more likely to be connected to that community and the cemetery and this, that, and the other things. So those are some of the reasons we're seeing, we believe, and the math proved it, that cremation rates are growing slower. Because when you think of Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, a lot of those high affiliation with Christianity in particular, agriculture, manufacturing, less transients, it flows. One thing, though, we did discover in that research, and other consumer research has proven over and over again, there is an assumption, say, that African Americans don't cremate at the same rates as others, for example, like a racial component to this. And that's just not true. African Americans cremate just as often as white people in Mississippi, which is not that often, right? And African Americans cremate just as often in Nevada or Washington as other races. So it's more, the influence is more your community, keeping up with the Joneses kind of thing.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah. Because I know that's kind of like a hearsay type of, I don't know, stereotype or statistic that we've always said that the Black funeral homes do not tend to cremate as much, or they don't tend to choose cremation. But I guess it's not as, I guess it just depends on where they're at.
It depends on where they're at. And I think direct cremation has kind of obscured those numbers a bit. And there are racist roots with this too, in that historically crematories were on cemetery property. And especially some of those cemeteries that embraced cremation in the South were segregated. And so if you were Black and wanted to be cremated, you couldn't be. You couldn't be buried in that cemetery either. So yeah, we're kind of delving into history in anticipation of the 150th anniversary of sesquicentennial of cremation in 2 years. And we're uncovering some really interesting things and some really sad things, but I don't want to shy away from any of it. It's all part of our history, right?
Yeah, I mean, it all shapes the numbers and the statistics that we see today.
Yeah.
So the report kind of says that if we follow the Canadian trends, we're at like a 15-year lag. Has that been pretty much hand in hand in past?
It really has. And this is something we've been tracking for a few years. But as you may have figured out, Tyler, since this is our third conversation, with steady, predictable growth, it's a little challenging every year to come up with a new headline for the report. Okay. Big surprise, cremation increased this year. But we led with that this year because all the numbers kind of were nice and round, 60.6% in US, exceeding 75% for the first time in Canada. And basically what that means is as we decelerate in the US, our growth rate will go closer to 1%. And as Canada approaches 80% nationally, they're already below 1% growth. And so we're just really, I think the next mile marker will be when Canada starts bopping up and down with their cremation rate, and that'll be a sign of plateau. And we're not seeing that quite yet because British Columbia is over 90% cremation. And then there are provinces that are in the 60s. So that 75% is an average, obviously, but we'll see when it starts flattening out for real.
Yeah, I think besides the very, very north of Canada, it doesn't look like there's anything under 50% cremation rate in any province.
No, and there's very little population. Yeah. I mean, it's something like, I forget what the statistic is, but somebody will correct me. Something like 80% of the population of Canada lives within 100 miles of the U.S. border. You know, I mean, way to make it about the U.S. Sorry to be that ugly American, but you think of it for a lot of reasons. Like, where are the big cities, located? Where is it temperate to live? And the further north you get, the harder it is. So there's certainly populations up there, but especially with Indigenous populations, burial is far more the tradition.
I'm sure they're not competing with $6.99 cremation online things way up in the Great White
Although
North.
I did meet a cremationist from, I need to make this Nunavut, who practices alkaline hydrolysis.
Oh.
And yes, and the water he uses is glacial melt, which is like the purest water anywhere. And so we had a really wonderful conversation about what that means and how alkaline hydrolysis works with a septic tank, which it does very well, by the way. So, but he's not doing high volume as one could imagine in Nunavut, but it's very popular. So,
well, when you look at the statistics, no one's really doing high volume either, even in the US. So it looks like the prediction is by 2038, the US will hit 75%.
Yeah.
And you guys do make predictions, and obviously, I understand that I'm not going to hold you. No one's going to hold you to that, because with new data, we have new projections, we have new projections, we have new, information. So we want to change that. But how close would you guys say CANA gets on these reports within a year-to-year basis, within a 5-year basis, within a decade-long basis?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're really, I'll brag a little bit. We're really close, especially year over year. We're within tenths of a percent. And to give you an idea of what that variability might be, we don't get final numbers from every state, just right, boom, on January 1st, right? We don't. It takes some time, and some states are very clear about only issuing final numbers. Some states will issue what are called provisional numbers, which, so there may be a very small percentage, I mean, tenths of a percent, but hundreds of deaths, say, in a given state that are still in an other or unclassified category. And then after a year or two, everything's counted up right and published. And so then we update the figures on a rolling basis. And our statistics consultant, Arvind Singhal, runs his algorithm based on these things. And so from year to year, we're very, very, very close. Within 5 years, we have a really good track record. Just for giggles, we'll go out 10 or more years. And then it gets hard to predict, and we err on the side of conservative. So his algorithm will produce like 6 growth patterns, right? From the most aggressive growth to the least aggressive growth, and we tend to pick one, either model 3 or 4 or average 3 and 4, to be even more conservative, combine the two. Because our point with doing the research and with projections is not just shock. We don't want to shock value or something. We're not trying to scare anybody with the worst possible scenario, whatever that means. We're really trying to describe what the future can look like. Yeah. So after we exceeded 50% cremation in 2016, Arvind went back to the drawing board with the algorithm to try to figure out, well, what's the right model to show slower growth rather than rapid growth. So I'm even more confident in these numbers now because he's finished his adjustment.
How long have you guys been doing the reports?
So we've been doing the report as it stands now at state level data using vital statistics information for the better part of 20 years.
Okay.
So we have a good, solid 20-year data set. And that's just improving as states embrace EDRS standards, electronic death registry standards, and we can get this electronically. States have also figured out, hey, we can charge for this. And so it's, we often pay programmers to run these reports for us, which we're happy to do because it does cost them money to do this. And we get exactly, what we order that way. There's no question. But we've been counting cremations since CANA started in 1913. We had, I think it was 40 cemetery members, and they reported how many cremations they did. And these were cemeteries in the US and Canada. And there obviously, then as there is now, not everybody was a CANA member. So really for the, up until I would say, the late 90s, early 2000s, we were going on surveys that CANA conducted as well, a mix of surveys, member validation, we call it, and then the actual dispositions collected from death certificates. So I'm proud that we've shifted more toward this, the death certificate data, because then it's not biased based on business model or anything like that. Yeah.
Part of the reason I ask is because, I've been in death care now for almost coming up on a decade now. And it seemed like when I first started that this cremation rate increasing was like a shock to everyone, or maybe it was a denial. But you guys have been putting out this data for a while, and now it shows that we're going to go to 80% in the next 14 years.
Mm-hmm.
So
likely,
I don't know, something to think about as you model your business or look to the future of death care, I would think.
I've given a lot of thought to that, since 2016 when we hit 50%, and I was talking to all the trade press as well as consumer media, where did this come from? How did this come out of nowhere? And we even looked at 2008, 2009, the Great Recession, really closely to see did that, that record rates of unemployment and all these did that move cremation rate growth? It did not, right? It didn't. If you just look at disposition numbers, you would never guess we went through a huge recession. Did the pandemic, right? Did COVID-19 move cremation rate growth? It did not. Numbers, it sure did. Numbers, of course, it did. So I've been thinking about this, like, how did it take people by surprise? And what I realized is that S curve. When you think of it took 100 years to be 5% and then 50 years to get to 50%. And the longevity and the multi-generation businesses in our profession, of course it felt suddenly. That's one generation to another that you're going from no cremation to speak of to 50% cremation. And it's still 50 years, right? And shorter time periods out west. And, there's variation within states, but that's not the way humans think. We think about what our parents did versus what our grandparents did. And I think it's really like the generation working in funeral service now, I've gained more empathy for them because a lot of these are your clients, right? They're very successful. They've built successful businesses. They've done exactly what the future generation or their past generations have done, right? Typically fathers and grandfathers, but not exclusively. Well, why are they doing the same thing and it's not working as effectively? And so the amount of change they've experienced, technology, cremation gets blamed as this catch-all, right? Like cremation is the enemy. I hear cremation takes the food out of my children's mouth. I was accused of that once by someone very drunk in a bar.
You were? Oh.
I was. He got right in my face. He
Yeah.
apologized later. But I was like, wow, I think cremation is a form of disposition, but it's also a business model. I mean, the anger, the frustration, the concern, the worry is really about profitability, right? That's what they're really, So the rate of change and having to shift how these businesses are run and what we do, that has been very acute over the last 10 to 15 years within our careers here. Yeah.
Yeah. Was there anything in the data that jumped out at you that you didn't see coming or that actually surprised you?
I think one thing that was really interesting is I'm kind of looking for and waiting to see an impact on new forms of disposition. So, for example, Washington State is the one state, and Colorado, but less recently, that Washington State for 4 years now has had all forms of disposition legal and active, and cremation is over 80% and continues to grow. So questions for further research are, where are these new forms of disposition drawing from, right? Are they drawing from casketed and embalmed burial? Are they drawing from cremation? The numbers are still small enough. We don't know, but we're watching. Arizona is a state we're watching closely. There's a ton of body donation, medical donation. And Arizona by all rights should be over 80% cremation, and it's not. But medical donation is above 10%, I believe. We think the national rate for medical donation is 2%. So it's really, really high in Arizona. I mean, that's a conversation for another time probably, but those are the kinds of things we're tracking. And I think these new forms of disposition could be an S curve on top of the cremation S curve. So it kind of might depress cremation. And the other thing you'd mentioned, like we can't tell from death certificates if services are offered with these. Yeah. So one of the things we're tracking is embalming, because some states track embalming on the death certificate. And shock of shocks, they're basically, we just look at the numbers. When people cremate, they don't embalm for the most part. You can cremate an embalmed body, to be clear, but consumers aren't choosing it. And so it's something I present a lot about now. I talk to funeral directors about to understand your embalming rate and embalming and cremation, because it's probably an indication of services offered as well. So it's just something to track, because if you, and many of our members do, love to embalm and are really great at it and embrace all the things that embalming offers to the families they serve, don't give up on cremation, folks, right? Like they may still benefit from it too. And it's just always fascinating to me, the variation among states. I wish I could I always dive into those first.
Yeah, I mean, they're pretty big. Some of the differences, like they from state to state, even neighboring states, especially as you get on the like Texas north and south line, like there's a pretty big difference there. I do wonder though that, when you look at costs, cremation is still by far the most affordable, especially if you look at direct cremation. When you look at NOR or alkaline hydrolysis, like those usually tend to be not only time difference, but cost. Like they're not even apples to apples anymore. Like you're looking at thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars usually, compared to what you can get done for $1,000. So I wonder as the costs start to come down and scalability goes up, that it will start to draw from cremation, or if that's maybe not a cremation. I don't know.
I wish I knew. I think medical donation is the main impact right now, as we're seeing in Arizona and possibly seeing nationally. I wonder about green burial too, but just as we can't differentiate between cremation with service or no services in the disposition stats, we can't differentiate between green burial and all forms of burial is a continuum, right? So, and it's all within those numbers. So, at 60.6% cremation, that's roughly 37% burial. I don't know what slice of that is green burial, and the remainder is everything else. So I think, though, that when we've done consumer research, which we've done, and I've been on here talking about it, so I'll just reference it without going into it. Consumers who are choosing cremation for environmental reasons, it's a fallback position. If green burial were more available, even knowing it's more expensive, they would do it.
Yeah.
But cremation is just the next best thing. And so for that segment of cremation customers, they're going to choose the greenest option available to them. And that's where the S curves on top of the cremation S curve may form. I don't know what portion of cremation customers are, it used to be people would cite land use and cremation's greener, but with the concern about carbon footprint, I think less. So maybe 11% is my best guess based on our research. We're choosing cremation for environmental reasons. The rest of them say it's what we do. It's our new tradition. And of course, price, right? Personal preference and price are the top reasons. Mm-hmm.
And so I know we were talking and you just got back from England.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about what you did there and what you've learned?
Absolutely. So I went to the Cremation Burial Communication Education Conference, and it's a joint meeting of two groups in England, the Cremation Society of Great Britain and the Federation. And this is so embarrassing. It's just there, and I can't remember the name. But basically, it's like the CANA of England, because the Cremation Society of Great Britain is really more of a membership association. It sounds like it would be what we call Cremation Society, but crematories in England are not privately owned. That's the rare model. They're municipally owned. So imagine every county owning a crematory and it being super high volume with $1 million abatement equipment attached to it. And so they're doing a minimum of 10,000 cremations each location a year, minimum. Some are way up to 35,000 with multiple machines. These are numbers we don't see in the United States, like not even close. Lop off a zero, that's the biggest operator in the US, right? So it's fascinating. These machines are fast. Cremation takes 45 minutes with the newest equipment, 45 minutes. And typically it takes, 3 to 5 weeks to schedule a cremation. So imagine that from point of death to the time of cremation, it can take 3 to 5 weeks. And that cremation is always witnessed, always. And so the committal service, as they refer to it, is the body entering the cremation chamber. Sometimes it goes down into the chamber. Sometimes it goes into the chamber via, what do they call it? Loader, right? Like via the tray. And so it was really interesting because what we think of direct cremation, we are exporting to the UK. There are low-cost providers, online providers who are doing this, no service, the body is present, but no witnessing. And this is new and unheard of and culturally just, right? But what we take it for granted that direct cremation is new and appealing. And interestingly, has some advocates. Like I met a Monsignor from Manchester who's advocating for this because it takes so long to have these cremation services. And then the cremated remains are returned to the family, not placed in a cemetery. Oh no, they might be scattered. He was advocating skip the Catholic Mass at the crematory, have the cremation happen, and then they'll have the Catholic service at the cemetery. And I said, well, there's a flaw in this plan. What if they don't come back to you to the cemetery? And his response to me was, well, there could never be a cremation without a servant. That would never happen. Who would do that? Right? A significant portion of the U.S. population would do that, as a matter of fact. So never say never. And so I'm not laughing at him. I mean, we had a fascinating conversation. He was advocating for reform that really serves grieving families, and advocating for no scattering for Catholic remains. So it was really fascinating. But why was I there? I was presenting there. I'm also the president of the International Cremation Federation, which is an association of associations. So we had representatives from Australia, Belgium, the Netherlands, Italy, England, US and Canada, South America. So Andres Aguilar from Alpar was there. So he was representing, was it 36 countries, I guess.
Oh, wow.
So we had, we did not have any African representatives or Asian representatives. Australia, ACA, does include some countries, some Asian countries along with that. But yeah, most of Europe was well represented. So we did country reports, we had business meetings, we had exchanges, we, did fun things. It was fantastic.
The world meeting of cremationists.
Yeah, basically all like 120 of us. It was not, really, I make it sound like it's this big Congress, but in most of the world, what International Funeral Service really looks like are trade shows. And I don't know if you've gone to any of those, right? But there are huge trade shows, bigger than anything we have in the United States. And they draw regionally, like hemisphere regionally. But as far as the kind of meetings that take place within a country, those meetings are similar to what we experience in the US, right? It's 1 to 3% of funeral professionals who attend national meetings regularly. It's kind of the same for international, but that kind of exchange is so wonderful. Even to learn that direct cremation in Italy, for example, my new friend Fabrizio explained to me that it is essentially witness cremation, that by law, by statute, you cannot have a cremation without a family member or the person with the right to control present.
Oh, wow.
You don't have to have the Catholic Mass anymore. You used to have to have that. You don't have to have that anymore, but someone has to be there.
You have to have a witness
to grieve, right? To grieve and so there's typically a service of some length around it. Fascinating, right?
Yeah. I know that different cultures have way different traditions than we do here. So yeah, that could be a whole nother episode.
Oh, I forgot Germany too. Speaking of that, because in Germany, you can't take the cremated remains home, right? They enforce this law too. And so, and no German, so you have to go through the funeral home. Again, in Germany, crematories are municipally owned for the most part. The crematory, by law, cannot release those cremated remains to an individual. They can only release it to a funeral home. The funeral home can only guide the family to the cemetery. And so what people are doing who live, Germany's a big country, but if you live along the borders, you can go to Holland. Thank you, EU, right? European Union has open borders. So you can go to Holland or Italy or wherever and get your cremation and keep the cremated remains or scatter them. So
I see.
Anyway, sorry. I digress. It's fascinating.
No. So why don't we talk a little bit about the Cremation Innovation Convention coming up? Just a little bit.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. Okay, get ready for the blatant plug. So, and you can come and see Tyler there too, because Parting Pro is exhibiting.
Yeah,
thank you very much. So our annual convention is coming up in Chicago, September 11th through the 13th. And yes, we realize we're asking you to fly on both September 11th and Friday the 13th. So apologies, but acknowledgement of that. It'll be worth it. I promise it'll be worth the effort to come. We're back at the Fairmont, Chicago for longtime CANA friends. We love the Fairmont location. It is great. We're excited to be there. It's a little later than usual. Normally our meeting's in August. The week we picked, the Democratic National Convention picked that week to come to Chicago. And regardless of your
Mm.
politics, as a longtime Chicago resident, you do not want to be in town when a huge citywide comes to town. You just don't. You can't get a restaurant reservation. You can't get an Uber. You can't get anything. So most of us leave town. But yeah, we're in CANA's hometown. So we're having a pre-convention workshop featuring Dr. Sarah Murphy about suicidalities. So I joke, start out on a high point. But for those of you who saw her presentation last year at the CANA convention, it was amazing. I mean, suicide is something that touches everybody. And the ability to work with families more, to learn the language and techniques to work with families who've experienced death by suicide, but even to recognize it in the people we love and our coworkers, the tendencies, the warning signs. Come to this workshop. You'll get some practical tips around all of that. And it won't be a downer. Believe it or not, it really won't. Then we kick off with an opening reception with exhibitors. That's Wednesday evening. All day Thursday is programming. Our programming is about leadership, women in the profession, workforce development, cybersecurity. We have our ever popular cremation fundamentals, where we have kind of brief deep dives into specific topics like grief and celebrants and handling cemetery complaints, latest, legal and other regulatory concerns. And then we close off Friday with a tour of Worsham College and the CANA offices, because Worsham is our landlord, if people didn't know that. So on your way out to the airport and back home, swing by for a tour and a welcome, experience. The CANA headquarters tour will take all of 5 minutes. We're not that big with 8 staff. But Worsham College has put in a crematory, an embalming classroom, state-of-the-art, updated their curriculum, which is less tangible, but state-of-the-art improvements to support their on-campus and online students. It's worth it. Awesome. It's worth a look. Yeah, we're excited you're going to be there.
Yeah, I mean, I love CANA. I love the CANA shows, and Chicago is an amazing city, especially for conventions. So I'm excited.
Excellent. Well, we're right in the heart of everything. So I hope every Parting Pro customer and listener to this, I'm a big fan of this podcast too. I recommend it to reporters and in the consumer press and anyone who really wants to understand the profession. So I'm a big fan.
No, I really appreciate that. And I'm glad you're a fan. Otherwise, it'd be really forceful of me to have you on so many times. So,
Well, what you don't know is every time I'm listening, I'm actually talking back to you. I just don't.
Okay.
Actually record that conversation. Lucky you. But no, thank you. It's always fun to talk about you ask great questions, and there's, really, we can get into the data, right? Because data drives decisions. Yeah. And that's what I hope comes out of this conversation is not just, cremation's up again, but the value of benchmarking and the value of understanding, where your business is nationally, but also statewide and even marked against your competitors. You got to keep looking at all the numbers.
Well, you guys have been right enough, I think, where people need to listen. So
thank you.
Yes. So you've proven your track record is solid. So I would say everyone should listen to what you guys have to say.
I agree. Thank you. We're here for you. We're here for all of you. Let us know if you have questions about the statistics. And also, it's always fascinating when members contact me, and it is me that handles the statistics questions, because, it ranges from I'm going into the bank to, finance and expansion or acquisition or new equipment or, I don't often see the business plans, but I get questions from members that contribute to business plans. I'm happy to help. No question believe me, if I don't know, I'll say I don't know. I'll try to get the answer. But I love that what we do has real life applications for our members. Yeah. Otherwise we wouldn't do it, right?
No, I mean, you should definitely be looking at this data when you make business decisions, because it is very telling.
Yeah, thanks.
Cool. All right. Was there anything else?
No, come to see us in Chicago. We'd love to have you. And thank you for doing what you do. Funeral professionals, cremationists, you're awesome. We're here for you. Thank you.
And I'll be linking a link to the industry statistics page in the description below. So go ahead and take a look. And if you're not, become a member of CANA.
That's right. CANA members receive their full report in the May issue of the magazine, and the new members get access to the report as well. So it's never too late.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Barbara. It's always a pleasure.
Thanks,
Please
Tyler.
come back again.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you for listening for the Direct Cremation Podcast. I'm Tyler Yamasaki. Catch you guys next time. Thank you so much for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. If you ever want to know more, please find us at directcremation.com.